The diary begins. I started the Deen Diaries as an experiment more than a promise. I wanted a place to collect the small proofs of Allah's presence that show up when we are quiet enough to notice them. They are rarely the kind of great miracles spoken about in history. More often they come as a coincidence that becomes a lesson, an answered prayer delivered through a stranger, or a silence filled with peace when fear should be louder. My name is Imran, and I teach biology at the local college. By day, I explain cells and heredity, and by night I try to match the wonders I lecture about with the larger wonder that is faith. The first entry in my diary began on a rainy morning. The city was still wet from the night. Gutters were overflowing. The scent of wet earth filled the air, and the river near the edge of town was swollen with rain. There is a small bridge on the road I take to the college, a place where children sometimes stop to look down at the water. That morning, I saw a boy. They're soaked without shoes and trembling with fear. He had been playing near the riverbank with two other children when the fast current pulled one of them in. The boy on the bridge had come running for help. People in our neighborhood move slowly. At first, some hesitate, others wait for someone else to act. I saw a small crowd forming, some covering their mouths, others holding their phones, but no one stepping forward. Then a taxi driver named Bilal pushed through. He was past 50 and known in the neighborhood for his loud arguments. That morning, however, he had no words, only action. He stepped onto the slippery bank, removed his shirt and jumped into the water. It took 3 men, including Bilal, to pull the drowning child out. The boy coughed and cried, his lungs struggling to find air again. While the rescue happened, an old woman standing nearby began reciting verses from the Quran. She held a cup of tea forgotten on the wall, and her voice rose softly above the noise. Her recitation calmed the crowd. No one prayed loudly, yet everyone felt the same trust in Allah. Later at the clinic, when the boy opened his eyes and smiled at his mother, the whole ward felt touched by something greater than relief. What struck me was not the rescue alone, but the chain of small choices Bilal could have ignored, the call the old woman could have stayed inside. Instead, ordinary people did ordinary things, and those actions became the means of Allah's mercy. I wrote in my diary, "Mercy often travels on the legs of the ordinary." A week after the flood, the college hosted a seminar on faith and community. I was invited to speak, and I chose to talk about stories like the one on the bridge. I wanted to show how belief guides action, not only through miracles, but through human courage. In the audience was an elderly man with a cane who later introduced himself as Hamid. He was a retired carpenter and had spent his life fixing doors and building frames. He told me a story about an orchard years ago. A wealthy landowner wanted to buy the land where the orchard stood, promising a large sum. The community argued for months. Should they take the money? Should they build a school or a clinic? The questions were tempting. But Hamid said at night, when he walked past the orchard and saw the blossoms, he felt it had been placed there for a reason. In the end, the neighbors kept it. They refused the offer and preserved the orchard. Years later, during a heat wave, the trees gave shade and shelter to families. The landowner's project failed, but the orchard continued to serve. Hamid told me, we believed Allah had put it there for a purpose, and the purpose showed itself later. That story stayed with me. Sometimes faith asks us to hold on to something not because of what it gives today, but because of what it will give tomorrow. I wrote that down too. Sometimes provision is not money, but the patience to wait for what Allah has written. My friend Mariam is a physicist, and we often meet at a small cafe. She once asked me how my belief in signs is different from confirmation bias. I thought about it and admitted that people do see what they want to see. Yet there are experiences that refuse to be explained away. Mariam then shared her own example. One night at her observatory, a satellite system failed. They needed a spare part before dawn, but the suppliers were closed. The only person who had it was an engineer who was supposed to be away caring for a sick parent. Yet, against all odds, he came and the project was saved. Mariam called it chance, I called it provision. We agreed that sometimes science names the mechanism and faith names the meaning. In my diary I wrote, "Provision is not always wealth. Sometimes it is timing. Sometimes it is people. Sometimes it is strength arriving just when despair grows loud." The first part of my Deen Diaries ended with this reflection. Writing these entries changed me. Collecting small stories of faith made me notice them more, and also made me aware of my own shortcomings. The diary became both a mirror and a map, showing me where Allah's power touches our daily lives, not as thunder, but as a gentle hand guiding us through lessons in everyday life. The second part of my diary began with a simple thought. What does it mean to live each day knowing that Allah's power surrounds us, yet often remains unseen? We walk through crowded streets, we sit in noisy buses, we stand in lines at markets, and yet within these ordinary moments there are lessons waiting for us, if only we pay attention. One evening I was returning from college when the bus I was in broke down in the middle of a busy road. The driver stepped out and tried to restart the engine, but nothing worked. People grew restless. Some shouted, others left to walk home. The air was heavy with impatience, yet in the midst of that noise, an old man sitting quietly near the door began reciting Surah Yasin. His voice was calm, steady, and full of warmth. Slowly, the angry voices grew silent. One by one, people began to listen. Some lowered their heads, some whispered prayers. It was not the fixing of the bus that mattered at that moment. It was the stillness that settled over everyone. We waited together, not with frustration but with patience. And when another bus finally came, people helped each other climb in first, the women, then the elderly, and then the rest. I wrote in my diary, "Patience is not the absence of hardship. It is the presence of trust." Another lesson came from a young boy in my neighborhood. His name was Arif, and he sold newspapers at the corner of the street to help his family. One day, while I was buying a paper, I noticed he had not taken money from a man who had picked up a newspaper. When I asked why, Arif smiled and said, "The uncle forgot his wallet yesterday and promised to pay today. I trust him, he will not lie." His trust surprised me, for he was only 12. Yet true enough, the man returned later to give him double the price. He said, "You trusted me, so I will honor that trust." That small act between a poor boy and a busy man became for me a reminder that trust in others can awaken honesty, I wrote. Trust, placed with sincerity, can open doors that fear would only close in. College. A student named Hina faced another kind of test. She came from a village where few girls were allowed to study. She had struggled against pressure from her relatives to continue her education. One afternoon, she came to my office in tears. She had failed one subject, and her relatives were saying it was a sign that girls should not waste time in studies. I listened to her and told her, failures are not the end. They are steps on the path. Allah tests those He loves, not to break them, but to strengthen them. She returned to her work with renewed courage. By the end of the year, she not only passed the subject, but also became one of the top students in her class. Later, she told me, "Teacher, the failure that once felt like a curse became my reason to fight harder." Her journey became a living lesson that strength grows when faith holds steady. Another story I wrote came from my neighbor Aisha, the young widow. She had 2 children and no stable income. Her days were filled with endless struggle, yet she never stopped smiling. One night during a blackout, I went to check on her. She was sitting with her children by the faint light of a candle, telling them stories from the lives of the prophets. The children laughed, clapped, and ask questions as if they had forgotten hunger and darkness. In that dim room, I saw the meaning of real provision. It was not food or wealth, it was hope that kept their hearts alive. I wrote, "Provision is the strength to face tomorrow, even when today is empty." There was also the matter of forgiveness, which I once thought was the hardest act of faith. A quarrel had broken out between two shopkeepers in our market. Words had turned harsh, and both swore never to speak again. Days passed, and the anger poisoned the air around their shops. Then one Friday after the sermon on mercy, one of them walked quietly to the other and said, "Brother, forgive me. I was wrong." Without hesitation, the other embraced him. Their shops stood side by side, and from that day, the market felt lighter. Their example taught me that forgiveness is not weakness, but power. The one who forgives carries the strength of peace, while the one who clings to anger remains chained. These everyday moments became the heart of my diary. Each one reminded me that Allah's power is not always revealed through storms or miracles. It is often found in patience, trust, courage, hope, and forgiveness. It is in the hands that lift a child from danger, the voice that calms a restless crowd, the smile of a mother who has nothing yet gives everything, and the heart that forgives when pride demands revenge. I ended part 2 of my diary with a reflection. We live in a world where people search for greatness in wealth, power, and recognition. But the true greatness is hidden in the small acts that reflect Allah's guidance. Every lesson, every story, and every test is a reminder that our world is full of signs for those who reflect tests that shape the soul. The third part of my diary began with the thought that Allah tests every soul in different ways. Some tests come as loss, some as fear, some as pain, and others as delays in what we desire. At first, these trials feel like walls placed before us, yet with time they reveal themselves as doors leading us to strength and wisdom. One story that touched me deeply was of my student Rahim. He had earned a scholarship abroad, something he had dreamed of since childhood. His mother, however, fell ill soon after the acceptance letter arrived. Rahim was torn between chasing his dream and staying by his mother's side. After many restless nights, he chose to defer his scholarship and care for her. His relatives criticized him, saying he had wasted a golden chance. Yet I saw in his eyes a peace greater than the glitter of success. He told me, "Teacher dreams will wait, but mothers will not months." Later, his mother's health improved, and his scholarship was still reserved for him. His sacrifice became a lesson that true success is not measured by speed, but by loyalty to what Allah values most. Another test appeared in the life of my colleague, Salman. He was a teacher known for honesty and fairness. When the school offered a promotion, it was expected that he would get it. But the position was given to another man who had stronger connections. People whispered, and Salman was quietly hurt. Yet instead of bitterness, he continued his work with the same devotion. A year later, the same man who had taken the position was removed for dishonesty, and the administration turned to Salman with respect. This time, he accepted, but without pride. He said, "Allah writes the right time for everything." My diary entry for that day was, "Patience holds doors that ambition cannot open." There was also the story of a young mother named Nadia. Her family lost their home in a fire. She and her children survived, but their belongings were gone. I visited her at the shelter expecting to see despair. Instead, I found her distributing food to other families who had lost less than her. She told me, "If Allah saved my children, He has already given me everything. Else can return." Her words carved a permanent space in my memory. I wrote, "Gratitude is not about counting what is lost, but recognizing what still remains." Forgiveness, too, was tested in the life of a man in our neighborhood named Farouk. His younger brother had borrowed money and failed to return it, which caused years of tension. They stopped speaking and their families grew apart. One Eid day, Farouk surprised everyone by visiting his brother with gifts and an apology, even though he was the one owed money. When asked why he forgave, he said, "Because my heart was heavier than my pocket." His forgiveness healed both families and restored a bond that money could never buy. I wrote, "Forgiveness is a gift that frees not only the other person, but your own soul." In another entry, I reflected on the story of a poor tailor named Shabana. She struggled to feed her children, yet whenever she earned a little extra, she would buy food for a neighbor who lived alone. People asked her why she gave away what she herself needed. She replied, "When I share, Allah replaces it with something better." One winter, when her machine broke, the entire neighborhood collected money to buy her a new one. The love she had given returned to her, multiplied it. Was a lesson that charity never decreases wealth. It only plants seeds for unseen provision. These stories became the pillars of part 3 of my diary. They showed that tests are not punishments, but invitations. They call us to patience, sacrifice, gratitude, forgiveness, and generosity. Each trial uncovers what lies within our hearts. I close this part with a personal reflection. Life is not meant to be a smooth road. It is a journey filled with turns, hills, and storms. Each challenge carries within it a chance to rise above ourselves. When we endure with faith and act with sincerity, we become stronger than the hardship itself. That is the secret of the tests. They do not come to destroy us, but to reveal to us the power Allah has placed within our souls, the power of reflection. The final part of my diary began with a realization that all the lessons, stories, and tests of life are like pages of a book. Each page seems separate, but when read together, they reveal the wisdom of Allah's power guiding us through every stage of our journey. One evening, I sat on the rooftop of my house. The city lights flickered. The call to prayer echoed in the distance, and a cool breeze carried the smell of earth after rain. In that stillness, I thought about how everything around us reflects Allah's greatness: the rising of the sun, the flow of the river, the endless stars above, and even the breath we take, all are signs for the one who reflects. Yet most of us move too fast to notice them. My diary note for that night was, "The world is a classroom, and every detail is a teacher sent by Allah." The next morning I met Hamid, the retired carpenter, again. He shared another story from his youth. He had once lost his only son in an accident. The grief nearly broke him, he told me. For months I asked why Allah would take him, but slowly I realized my son had been a trust, not a possession. Allah gave him to me for a time, and then called him back. The memory still brought tears to his eyes, but his heart was at peace. His words reminded me that life itself is a trust from Allah, and one day all trusts will be returned. Another powerful example of reflection came from my student Hina. She wrote an essay on the relationship between science and faith. In her paper, she argued that while science explains how creation functions, faith explains why it exists. She gave the example of water. Science shows us its cycle of evaporation and rain, but faith teaches us that each drop is mercy from the Creator. Her essay was not just academic, it was a message that understanding the world without recognizing its purpose leaves the picture incomplete. I also wrote about the night of Laylatul Qadr that year. The mosque was full of people, some standing in prayer, some weeping in silence, others sitting with Qur'ans in their hands. I looked around and felt the unity of hearts, different lives and struggles, yet all turning toward the same Lord. That night, I understood that Allah's power is not only in the creation of the universe, but also in the way He gathers hearts together in remembrance. The strength of that unity was greater than any wealth or army. Charity, too, became a reflection of Allah's power. During Ramadan, our neighborhood gathered funds for families in need. I saw how even small contributions created large relief. A shopkeeper gave food. A student donated his savings. A child handed over her toy to another child who had none. These acts were not grand in appearance, but they carried the fragrance of sincerity. Together, they became proof that when people give for Allah's sake, His power multiplies, the blessings beyond measure. At the end of the year, I returned to the bridge where the diary had begun. The river flowed calmly, children laughed by the bank, and Bilal, the taxi driver, stood nearby drinking tea. I greeted him and we spoke about that day of the rescue. He smiled and said, "I did not think much, I just jumped, but Allah gave me the strength." His simple words summed up everything I had been writing. Ordinary people, ordinary actions, yet touched by divine strength. I closed my diary with this reflection: our world is full of lessons, if we choose to see them. Allah's power is not distant or hidden. It is alive in patience, mercy, forgiveness, charity, trust, and hope. It is in the courage of a student, the smile of a mother, the kindness of a neighbor, and the strength of a believer in prayer. Every story is a reminder that our lives are woven with signs meant to guide us back to Him. The diary is now filled with pages, but its purpose remains the same: to remind myself and anyone who reads it that life is not random. Every breath, every trial, every joy, and every tear carries a lesson. Allah's power surrounds us, and our duty is to recognize it, reflect upon it, and live with it.